See if I can come up with a couple more of those there. When we measure things, we use a ruler. And guess what a ruler is? A ruler is, based on what we talked about already, would a ruler be a array, a line segment? What would it be? Jacob, what do you think?
A line?
Yeah, it's kind of a line that's divided up into segments. And that's how we measure things with those segments. And we have two different systems that I think I've given you the speech about, why we in the United States continue to use this archaic, hard to understand system. We have our customary system. And what are the units that we use? We think about inches and feet and yards and miles. And the problem with those is there's really no consistency between one and the other. Okay? For the simple reason is, an inch is about the distance between your knuckles. Well, if you put 12 inches together, you get a foot. If you put 3 feet together, you get a yard. If you put 5,280 feet together, you get what we call a mile. And there's no rhyme or reason. Why didn't the guy just go with tens? Why didn't he say 10 inches was a foot, and 10 feet was a yard, and 10 yards was a mile or something like that? But they went and did this, and it just makes it tough on everybody. And then we have the metric system, which is the smart people's way to go. Because in the metric system we have what? What are the units we mostly use? Metric system, the smallest one we usually use is, Grace?
Centimeters.
Millimeters first, and then centimeters, and then we use meters, and then we use kilometers. Now there are some distances between some of these, okay? In between a centimeter and a meter, there's what, a decimeter. Between the meter and the kilometer, there's a couple things. There's a decameter and a hectometer, but I guess we don't need all those, so we narrow it down to just these here. Okay, there are 1,000 millimeters in a meter. There's 100 centimeters in a meter. There's 1,000 meters in a kilometer. And again, just working with thousands and tens and hundreds, it's a lot easier to multiply and divide by those because you remove the decimals. Now, if I asked you how long a kilometer is, what would you tell me? Anybody? A kilometer. Or how does that relate to our mile? I guess we think of things in terms of miles because our cars go X amount of miles per hour. Is a kilometer more than a mile, less than a mile? Almost a mile? Come on, cross-country people, where are you? For example, a lot of times people run in a 5K race, and what that 5K means it's 5 kilometers. How many miles do you run in a 5K race? I don't know if I know exactly what it is myself. Alex, what is it? Somebody know what exactly it is?
0.2 or something.
Well, you might be thinking about 2.2 pounds in a kilogram.
No, 3 point something.
Does anybody know for 100% sure it is? Nicholas, what is it?
3.1 miles.
Are you sure?
Yes.
Do you agree with them? Taylor, do you agree with the 3.1 thing?
What was the other 5K one?
What?
What was the other 5K one?
It's 3.1 miles? I'll look it up in a minute, I don't know for sure. And if that's the case, what's longer, a mile or a kilometer? Jacob?
A kilometer?
Well, if there's 5 of them that make up 3, what has to be longer? A mile has to be a little bit longer. I don't know what the exact conversion is. Looks like it's probably, whatever, 1 point something kilometers make up a mile, and whatever it is. What about a yard and a meter? What's the comparison there? Luckily for you, I've got one. This, yardstick or meter stick? Yard, meter. This is actually a meter stick. How do I know? Because there are 100, this goes up to 100 centimeters. Now, how big is a yard? A yard is 36 inches. So for this to be a yardstick, I'd have to cut off about 3 inches. This is about a yard, from what you can see there. This is a meter. So they're awful close. Okay, a meter stick's about 3 inches longer than a yardstick. What's that say? 39.25. So you kind of get the gist of all that sort of thing there. Now the problem with our little measuring system with our customary system, is that, I'm going to explode an inch here. The problem with our system is an inch is a pretty big thing in our modern day world to measure. What happens if we have something and we're measuring it smaller than an inch? And we're using our customary system. Well, then what did we have to do? Jacob?
Use fractions.
We had to use fractions. Now, if you're like me, fractions aren't really the most fun thing in the world to use, but so what somebody said, well, okay, in order to get a smaller unit, we'll cut an inch in half. So now we have a half of an inch as a measuring thing. Write this down, Gary. You have this written down? Okay, and then a half an inch wasn't good enough, so then somebody said, well, let's cut a half of an inch in half. So now we have a quarter inch. But here's the problem, children. A quarter inch here, tick mark, is also a quarter inch here. But it's called a 2/4 inches. But we don't ever say 2/4 of an inches because a half inch is simpler. You know what I'm saying? And that's where people run into trouble with it. Then we've got 3/4 of an inch. I should have moved my 1/4 down here. Okay, those are all my quarter inch marks. But we don't say 2/4 of an inch. You never call it, that's always a half of an inch. Then that wasn't small enough, so then somebody split each one of those in half. And when they did that, what did we get? The 1/8 inch marks. So you have 1/8, and you have 2/8, and we have 3/8, and we have 4/8, and we have 5/8, and we have 6/8, and we have 7/8, and we have 8/8, I guess. And the problem with that is, okay, we don't ever say 2/8 because it's the same as 1/4. The only 1/8 inches that we say out loud as an eighths are the 1/8, the 3/8, the 5/8, and the 7/8. If you measure something to be 6/8 of an inch long, and you put 6/8 down on your paper, I'll mark it wrong. Why? Because you have to say it as 3/4. And that's where it gets all confusing. You don't have to do that with the metric system. You can just say it's 15 millimeters or whatever it is. And then, lest we think we're done here, children, what do we have to do? We split eighths in half again. Yep. So now we have 0/16, 1/16, 2/16, 3/16, 4/16, 5/16, 6/16, 7/16, 8/16, 9/16, 10/16, 11/16, 12/16, 13/16, 14/16, and oops, I missed 15/16, and 16/16. Of all of those 16ths, which are the ones that you will actually say as 16ths? You can only say one is a 16th if there's nothing above it. Because if there's something above it, it's the simpler form. So, Nicholas says, what will we say? We could say,
1/16.
okay, we can have a 1/16, but we can't have a 2/16 because that's the same as a half. You can have a 3/16, but you can't have a 4/16 because that's the same as 1/4. You can have a 5/16, but you can't have a 6/16 because it's the same as 3/8. You can have a 7/16, and you can have a 9/16, and so on and so on and so on and so on and so on. And I'll give you the real crux of the matter. If back in the day you were working on cars, okay, cars used to be made out of standard form nuts and bolts. Say you're helping your dad, like I did when I was a wee tot, okay? And my dad said, he says, oh, I think this is a 1/2-inch bolt. Go give me a 1/2-inch wrench. Well, I go, you grab the 1/2-inch wrench, and he says, oh, that's just a little bit too small. I need the next size bigger than a 1/2-inch. Well, then you gotta start thinking, what's the next size bigger than a 1/2-inch? It's not 1 inch, that's a whole big. You have to go down here and you think, oh, a 1/2-inch is the same as 8/16, the next size bigger is a 9/16. But it takes so long to think about it in terms of 16ths, it's really confusing. Whereas nowadays, you go and you get a 10mm wrench and your dad says, hey, go grab me the next size bigger, it's 11mm. That's not very hard, is it? Unfortunately. So our US system is just so hard because there's all these different fractions and then there's always different ways to say it. You always have to use the simplest one. Okay, you can't tell me that something is 8/16 because 8/16 is 1/2 of an inch. That is why, people, when you get old enough to make a difference, get in Congress and tell them to get rid of this system, go with the metric system. It's so much easier. Jacob?
So basically what you're saying, we could only use the odd fractions? Like,
Well, and it's not necessarily odd, it's every other one. But that still gets a little confusing because, I don't know, maybe you could do there, it's just way too confusing. It's basically, in all these guys, last year we reduced fractions, that's all it is. You know, you can take 6/16 and divide both 6 and 16 by 2 and you get 3/8. Alexa?
You're saying 10/16 is 5.
Yep, you would say 5/8, not 10/16. 10/16 is really true, but we always go with the simplest one, and that's 5/8. What's up?
Which one is this for last year?
I know. Bring it up because it's very confusing. You know, you had a 5/8 and that was too big. What's the next size smaller than 5/8? What is the next wrench smaller than 5/8? Alex?
3/8.
It is not 3/8. 5/8 is 10/16. The next smaller wrench is a 9/16. And that, again, that's why it's confusing. 3/8 is smaller, but if you're going to the next size smaller, that's that. But again, if I said, okay, I have a 20mm wrench, but I need the next size smaller, you just bring me the 19mm. It's just that easy. Take a look, please, at page 39.